Thanks for joining me today. In this video, we will walk through setting up your Forcepoint Web Security Hybrid environment to protect your roaming workforce. Forcepoint's Web Security Hybrid solution is designed to protect your users from web-based malicious threats while they are outside of the corporate network. This walkthrough will include confirming that you are licensed for the hybrid module, configuring the hybrid service, choosing, downloading, and installing an endpoint agent, modifying existing policies for hybrid users, and reporting on your roaming workforce. Enjoy! To get started, we are going to log into the Forcepoint Security Manager. Once you have logged in, let's confirm the account is licensed with the hybrid module. For this, we will navigate to the Settings, General, Account page. On the Account page, you should see the Web Security Hybrid module listed under Subscribe Features. If you do not see the Web Security Hybrid module listed under Subscribe Features, then you will need to reach out to your account manager who will be able to assist you in getting this module license for your account. While we're here on the account page, we should also confirm that there is a contact email address configured under the Hybrid Service section. This email address will be used for hybrid notifications as well as will be used for the next step. Sometimes you will see that there is a section that says Resume Hybrid Service Communication, as you see on this screen. If so, then you should have received an email from Forcepoint with the security token in it. If you did not receive this email, then you will need to reach out to tech support or your account manager so that they can provide this token to you. This token is what connects your on-premise deployment to the Forcepoint Cloud Service. The Forcepoint Cloud Service will receive a copy of your policies and your AD structure. This will allow for seamless filtering for your users wherever they are located. If you have the Web Security Hybrid module licensed and do not see the Resume Hybrid Service Communication on the account page, then proceed to the next step. If not, then you will want to pause the video before going through the hybrid configuration. Now that we have confirmed that you are licensed for the hybrid feature, let's go through the hybrid configuration. Let's navigate to Settings, Hybrid Configuration, Shared User Data. On this page, we will see the global catalog servers that the service will collect user information from. If you do not see anything listed on this page, then you will need to navigate to Settings, General, Directory Services. On the Directory Services page, you will add global catalog servers by clicking the Add button, then input the IP address or hostname and domain credentials to connect to the domain controller. Once you have input the global catalog servers, you will want to click OK and save and deploy. Now let's navigate back to Settings, Hybrid Configuration, Shared User Data. Now that we have the global catalog servers listed here, we will want to define the include context. The include context basically defines which users and groups you want to sync with the Forcepoint Cloud. Typically, you would want to sync all users and groups, but there are certain situations where you might not want to sync everything. This is a good time to understand some requirements about the user's accounts that need to be met to make the sync successful. The first thing is that the user's accounts must have an email address assigned to them. The second thing is that the email address must not exist twice. If there is another account that uses the same email address, then the sync will fail until the duplicate is removed. The Forcepoint Cloud Service works by creating an account for each user that is their name associated to a unique email address. Thus, if there is a duplicate email address, it fails because the same email address cannot exist twice. If you find or know that there are duplicate email addresses that exist in your Active Directory, then you have two options. 1. Go into your Active Directory and remove the duplicates manually by replacing the duplicate email address with a unique address. Or 2, you can use the exclude context that we see on the shared user data page here to exclude those duplicate users from the sync. You may be asking, how do I know if there are duplicate email addresses being synced? Great question. To see if your sync is successful, we will navigate to the Main, Status, Hybrid Service page. Here, you will want to select the drop-down for the Sync Service Communication Result and Last Directory Agent Sync Results. What you ideally want to see here is all green check marks, but you might see that the directory information sent by sync service has a red X, like this example here. To see the duplicate email addresses if your sync is failing, you will want to RDP to the Forcepoint Security Management server that hosts the sync service. Once on the Forcepoint Security Management server, you can open the services and see if the WebSense sync service is listed there. If it is, then open the browser and navigate to the sync viewer, the address for which will appear on the screen now. Once you have this open, you will be viewing the log of the actual sync service. Here you will see a list that shows the duplicate email addresses. Take this information and resolve it by resolving the duplicate within your Active Directory. At this point, your sync service should be syncing correctly. From here, we will proceed to configuring your filtered locations. The filtered locations inform the Forcepoint Cloud service of your offices or networks so that we can determine whether or not the user is in the network or out of the network. Before we can actually configure the filtered locations, we need to configure the Manage Explicit Proxies option. At the top of the screen here, you will see the Manage Explicit Proxies button. Let's select this. On this screen, we are going to configure the proxies that exist within the network today. These will be configured by IP address or host name. You will also need to specify the ports that the HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP traffic communicate over. Once you have configured all of your existing proxies, we will configure the filtered locations. Now that we are back on the filtered location screen, you will want to add a filtered location for each network. To configure the filtered location, we will need to input a name, the egress IP address, range, or subnet that the network uses. Then, at the bottom, you will need to specify which service manages the internet request for the location. For example, if you are configuring the headquarters, then you will want to select the Content Gateway proxy as the service, and then also pick how the requests are forwarded for this location. If the requests are sent explicitly, then you will need to select one of the proxies that we configured previously. Next, we will configure the Unfiltered Destinations. Let's navigate to Settings, Hybrid Configuration, Unfiltered Destinations. These will be websites that you do not want to be filtered. When you configure this with domains, traffic to these domains will be sent direct and not routed through the Forcepoint Cloud service. This means that there will be no logs of the transactions. After configuring the Unfiltered Destinations, we will configure the user access settings. Let's navigate over to Settings, Hybrid Configuration, User Access. This page is where we will find important information relating to how the cloud service should handle your users when they connect to the cloud. The first thing we will want to do on this page is copy the default PAC file address. We will put this in a notepad for later use. Here, you can configure whether or not the service fails open if the cloud service is unreachable. When you scroll down, you will see the HTTPS notification pages section. In here, we will want to click the link View Hybrid SSL Certificate. This will open up in a new tab, and what we're going to do is copy this to a notepad file and save it as a .crt. You will need to deploy this certificate out to your users that are going to be routed through the Forcepoint Cloud service. The certificate is required for the SSL decryption process, which is what provides the cloud with the ability to perform real-time content inspection, and is also required for the cloud service to be able to display block pages for HTTPS sites. Below this, you will see the Registered Domains section where you can configure your organization's domains. This will help the cloud service associate traffic from these domains to your account if they are coming from somewhere other than a filtered location. The next setting under this is the offsite users. We want to select the checkbox for Enable the hybrid service for offsite users. This is what will actually enable the hybrid service for your roaming users. The last setting for web browsing optimization helps to remove latency by routing the user's traffic to the nearest data center based on the egress IP of that user. From here, we will go through the hybrid user identification section to configure and download the endpoint agent that will be deployed to your users. Let's navigate to Settings, Hybrid Configuration, Hybrid User Identification. On this page, we will see configurations relating to the endpoint and user identification. The first section here is the Forcepoint Web Security Endpoint. We will need to enable the option that says Enable Forcepoint Web Security Endpoint Installation and Update on Client Machines. This will open up the deployment method options below it. Once we have enabled that, then we will want to select the Deploy Manually button. Now you can see the WSCONTEXT field, which is something that we will need later when we install the endpoint agent. For now, let's copy this and add it to our text file. Under this section, we will also see the View Files button, where we can actually download the endpoint agent and see the release notes for the current version. You can select one of these from here, but for the purposes of this video, we are actually going to manually download the endpoint agent from the Forcepoint support site later. Now we want to be careful with some of these configurations. Here you will notice that you have the option to install the endpoint agent automatically from the cloud service, but we recommend that you control the deployment of your endpoints. To this end, we recommend that you do not select the Deploy the Client software from the Hybrid Service option. After this, we want to configure the anti-tampering password. This is the password that is used to lock down the endpoint. This is a good time to talk about the benefits of using the Forcepoint ONE Endpoint. The first benefit is the enforcement capabilities. The agent uses the anti-tampering password for installation, uninstallation, and service stopping, so the user must have the password to be able to disable the endpoint. The agent also locks down the installation directory and registry so that the user cannot delete or modify these. Lastly, the agent assists with user identification by sending NTLM information along with the transactions to appropriately assign the user's policy. There are two types of web security endpoint agents, but we will cover the differences and which one you should use later down the road. Back to the hybrid user identification configuration. At the bottom of this page, you will see the options for NTLM, secure form, and manual authentication. You can modify these options to best fit your environment, but typically the default settings that you see on the screen are optimal for most customers. At this point, the majority of the configuration for the hybrid service is complete, but let me show you one more thing here under scheduling. Let's navigate to the Settings, Hybrid Configuration, Scheduling page. On here, you can see the two Send buttons. One under the Send User Data and one under the Send Policy Data Now section. If you want to force a sync, then you can come to this page here and click these two buttons to push an update. The cloud service does take a few minutes to propagate changes to all of the data centers. So hit these two buttons, then go get some coffee and come back to see if they push through, typically about 5 to 15 minutes. To see if the sync is successful, you'll want to check the Main, Status, Hybrid Service page, then select the Sync Service Communication Results and Last Directory Agent Sync Results. Finally, let's go ahead and save and deploy those changes. Next, we will go through manually installing an endpoint agent to your client machine. The first step in the endpoint installation process is to download the endpoint package builder. I prefer to build the package this way rather than downloading the version through the console because I want the endpoint to also include the DLP component, since this lab environment has DLP endpoint licensed for it as well. Let's make sure that we are going through these steps from the Forcepoint Security Management Server, as it will make things easier down the road. Forcepoint has become a leader in the cybersecurity space. We offer many solutions that utilize endpoint agents. Our customer base has been very vocal about the fact that there are too many endpoints installed on their users' machines and it's causing issues. Our solution to this was to create the new Forcepoint ONE Endpoint, which is a single endpoint that contains all of the agents for any solution in the Forcepoint portfolio. In this video, we will be installing the new ONE Endpoint. To download the latest endpoint package builder, we will navigate to the Forcepoint support site. Once you're here, go ahead and log in. Then, navigate to the Downloads page. On the Downloads page, select All Downloads. Then scroll down to the Endpoint Security section. Here, select the version 20 link under the ONE Endpoint column. At the bottom of this next page, you will see the Download button. Once the Endpoint Package Builder has finished downloading, we will go through creating the endpoint installation package. The first step in building the endpoint package is extracting the downloaded package builder. Let's go ahead and double-click on this to begin the extraction. Once this has extracted, you will see a folder with a bunch of files in it. Let's take a moment to discuss what I'm about to do here. In this lab environment, and possibly in your environment, we are also licensed for the DOP Endpoint solution. The Forcepoint ONE Endpoint that we are about to build has been designed to contain both the Web Security Endpoint Agent and the DLP Endpoint Agent. The purpose of this is to reduce the overall number of endpoint agents that are installed onto your users' machines. In this video, I am going to install an endpoint onto my client that contains both the Web Security and DLP components. With that said, we are going to have to take some of the files from this extracted package builder folder and put them into the Forcepoint installation directory to make sure the DOP endpoint works as expected. Let's open up that extracted endpoint package builder folder and look for the two files that we need. You should see these two listed here, one named EPA and the other named EPA64. Let's go ahead and select these and copy them. Now, let's navigate to the Forcepoint installation directory. By default, this is c:/program files x86/websense. Once we are in here, let's go into the data security folder, then into the client folder. Here, you might see the two files that we've copied already exist. Don't worry, we're going to overwrite these two that are here. Go ahead and paste the two that we copied from the package builder folder here into this directory. Now that we have updated the files that are needed for the DOP endpoint to work correctly, let's go through and build the endpoint package. Inside of this extracted package builder folder, we see that there is a file named websense endpoint package builder.exe. Let's go ahead and run this. The first window that opens up is going to be the component selection screen. Here we are going to select the components that you wish to install with this endpoint package. If you only own the web security solution, then you will only need to select the Forcepoint Web Security Endpoint option. If you own the web security and DLP endpoint components, then you will select both options like I do here. You might notice that under the Forcepoint Web Security Endpoint there are three options. Let's take some time to discuss each one of these. The first option here is the Direct Connect Endpoint, otherwise known as DCEP or DCEP. The DCEP agent is the less common of the endpoints used by our customers. This endpoint was designed to resolve certain issues that some of our customers experienced when using the Proxy Connect endpoint. This endpoint functions by sending traffic direct to the internet rather than being routed through our Forcepoint Cloud Proxy. When the request is made by the end user, the agent checks in with the cloud to determine whether or not the user is allowed to go to the site they are requesting. The cloud logs the request and informs the agent whether to block or not. The DCEP is ideal for use in situations where the use of proxies may be problematic. DCEP can improve security and usability of the service in some of the following scenarios. Off-site users that proxy connections cause issues. In areas where geographic firewalls prohibit the use of proxies. When geographically localized content is critical. For more information regarding when to use DCEP, please refer to the article below titled Web Endpoint Overview. The trade-off when using DCEP is that not all of the Forcepoint Cloud features work due to how the DCEP functions. Some of these services include true file type download blocking, cloud data security, bandwidth reporting, and YouTube for schools. For more information regarding which features are unavailable when using DCEP, please refer to the article below titled Deployment and Installation. The second option is the Proxy Connect Endpoint, otherwise known as PCEP or PCEP. The PCEP agent is the most common endpoint that is used by our customers. The PCEP agent redirects all traffic to the Forcepoint Cloud Proxy for analysis. This endpoint supports the widest set of security features, such as SSL decryption for real-time content analysis, data security scanning, and file sandboxing. It is important to note that the real-time protections that are available with this endpoint rely on the Forcepoint Cloud being able to decrypt the SSL or HTTPS traffic that is coming from the users. To be able to perform SSL decryption without presenting errors to the end user, we must deploy the Forcepoint Cloud SSL Certificate to the user's machines. This is what we downloaded earlier from the Forcepoint Security Manager and saved as a .crt. For more information regarding PCEP, please refer to the article below titled Web Endpoint Overview. The Proxy Connect endpoint is what we will be installing in this video. The last option you will see here under the Forcepoint Web Security Endpoint is the Remote Filtering Client. This is the legacy agent that was used in older versions of the web security solution. We will not use this in this video. After the Forcepoint Web Security Endpoint selection, you will see the Forcepoint DLP Endpoint option. As I mentioned before, I will be using the same endpoint agent for both web security and DLP endpoint. The DLP endpoint option here is what I will select to include the DLP functionality on the same installer. The last option on the component selection is the Forcepoint Endpoint Context Agent. This is the endpoint agent that our next-generation firewall uses to provide user and application information to the next-generation firewall. If you are an existing Forcepoint next-generation firewall customer and you would like to include this capability within the same installer as the web security and/or DLP endpoint, then feel free to select this option. In this video, we will be installing the agent for web security and DOP only. Now, let's get back to the package builder. On the platform and security screen, we will choose which operating systems we will be installing the endpoint onto. This is also where we will set the anti-tampering password for the client. I would recommend making this the same password that we set within the console earlier during the hybrid configuration section. This next screen is the installation directory, where you want the actual endpoint to install on the user's machine. I would leave it default, but you can change it if you'd like. After this, we are going to have to configure the Forcepoint Security Manager's IP address or hostname so the endpoint knows where to check in. This step is for DLP primarily, so if you are only installing the web security component, you might not see this page. Next, we need to configure if we want the interface of the endpoint to be hidden from the user. The interactive setting will show the icon in the taskbar on the user's machine, where the stealth option will hide the icon from the user. The second section here is what DLP mode you wish to install. If you want the full DLP functionality, which includes discovery capabilities, then select the full option. If you only want to use the DLP endpoint to perform discovery scanning, then select the discovery only option. Now that the DLP configuration portion is done, we are back on the web security configuration. On this screen, we need to configure the pack file that will be enforced when the endpoint is installed on the user's machine. Earlier during the hybrid configuration section, we copied this pack file address down into a text file. Let's locate that address and paste it here in the package builder. Double check that this address is correct by going back to the Forcepoint Security Manager, Settings, Hybrid Configuration, User Access page. Then make sure it pastes correctly into the field in the package builder. The last step is to select where you would like to save the package. I am going to put it on the desktop of the Forcepoint Security Manager so that I can locate it later. Now that we have gone through building the package, let's go through and install this onto a client. In this video, I will be manually installing the endpoint agent onto a client machine. In your environment, it might be easier to deploy the endpoint through SCCM or another software deployment method. For more information about deploying through SCCM or GPO, please refer to the articles below titled Deploy Endpoint SCCM and Deploy Endpoint GPO. The first step is going to be to copy the endpoint from the Forcepoint Security Manager server over to the client machine. Before we go through and actually install the agent, let's do some prep work. Let's go ahead and open up a notepad file. Here, we are going to want to grab the WSCONTEXT string that we copied earlier and paste it in here. Then we are going to want to get the installation command that we are going to run. The default installation string looks like this. You should see it on your screen now. We will then modify this default string to be appropriate for our file name, our password, and our WSCONTEXT string. It should look something like this when you're done with it. It is important to note that the WSCONTEXT is unique for each account, so you want to make sure that this matches what we copied down from the Forcepoint Security Manager earlier. If you would like to double check it within the Forcepoint Security Manager, then navigate to Settings, Hybrid Configuration, Hybrid User Identification. Now that we have finished the prep work, let's install the endpoint. Open a command prompt window as administrator. Navigate to the location of the endpoint installer. For me, this is on the desktop. Then copy the install command from the notepad and paste it into the command prompt window. Confirm it's the same as what you wrote in the notepad and hit enter. Once you hit enter, you should see a standard installer window pop up. Just click through next until the endpoint installs. The client machine will restart when the installation is finished. After the system comes back up, you should see the endpoint agent available in the taskbar. Congrats, you have successfully installed the endpoint agent. From here, we will install the SSL certificate. The last step that we need to do before we can test is deploy the SSL certificate to the client machine. As I mentioned earlier, this step is vital to being able to protect your users in real time as well as provide DLP and other essential functionality. To start this, we will need to move the .crt file that we saved earlier onto the desktop of the Forcepoint Security Management server over to the client machine. Once this file has been moved over to the client, we will open up Internet Explorer. Then navigate to the Options cogwheel in the top right and select Internet Options. Once the Internet Options window opens, we will navigate to the Content tab, then select the Certificates button. In the Certificates window, we will click on the Trusted Root Authority tab and click the Import button at the bottom. We will navigate to the Cloud Root Certificate that we copied over to the client machine, then click Open. Make sure to place the certificate into the Trusted Root Certificate Authority store and then click Finish. We have now deployed the SSL certificate to the client machine. Now that we have the hybrid configured and the endpoint installed, we will go ahead and modify an existing policy for when users are roaming. Let's navigate over to Main, Policy Management, Policies. Here, I am going to take a look at one of my existing policies and modify it to filter users differently when they are out of the network. If we take a look in here, we have a lot of categories blocked and some that use quota time and others that are allowed. If we select one of these categories that are blocked, we can see that on the right side there is an option to permit when user is off-site. This allows us to change how the policy applies to users who are out of the network. It is also possible to configure when a policy is active. If you see here inside of the policy, there is the section that says Schedule. The start, end, and days allows us to select when a policy is active. So another idea would be to modify the policy to not be active after working hours. This would allow your users some freedom to use their machines for personal use after working hours are over. If you wanted to create another policy, you could use the schedule to enable a strict policy for work hours and a more lenient policy for after hours. So if you wanted users to not watch YouTube or Netflix during working hours but allow them access after hours, then you could do that within another policy. Now that we've configured the hybrid solution, installed the endpoint, and modified the policy, we can now test and browse out to the internet on this client. Here on this client, we are going to browse to YouTube while they are on the internal corporate network. We can see that based on the policy that we configured earlier, YouTube is blocked. Now, when we switch this user to an external network, we can navigate back to YouTube and see that they are allowed. Now that we have tested the functionality and we can see that it is filtering the users, let's take a look at what reporting is available. Now that we are back in the Forcepoint Security Manager, let's navigate over to Main, Report Center, Transaction Viewer. The Transaction Viewer allows us to investigate specific users and see what they are doing. We will filter the results by the test user Cyclops, and we will add some fields to the body of the report such as category and action. Then we will hit Go. In the results, we can see that when the user was in the network, the action that was taken when they tried to go to YouTube was blocked, but when they were out of the network, it was allowed. We can also see what cloud applications our users are accessing by navigating to Main, Reporting, Applications. This report is the CASB Lite functionality that is included within the web security solution. This report shows us what cloud applications are being used by our users and what risk they pose to the organization. If we select here on the risk of the application, we can see why the Forcepoint CASB service has deemed this a medium risk application. If we click on the name of the application, we can actually dive in to see which users are accessing the application. Here at the top, we are able to select to see users that are on-site or users that are off-site. We can also scroll down to see a list of which users have accessed this application and how many times. Thank you for watching this video, where we were able to set up your Forcepoint Web Security Hybrid environment to protect your roaming workforce. In this video, we were able to confirm that you are licensed for the Web Security Hybrid module, configure the hybrid service, choose, download, and install an endpoint agent, modify an existing policy for hybrid users, and report on your roaming workforce. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below or reach out to your account manager for more assistance. If you would like to see more of these videos, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe to be alerted when videos are posted. See you next time!